So today's daf is Kuf Mem Hey 145. We're going to start in Kuf Mem Daled Amud Bet towards the bottom. Let's see how many pages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines up. This one ends with a little agada, so it's nice. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, Sochet Adam Eshkol Shel Anavim L'tocha Kedera V'lo L'tocha Ke'ara. A person can squeeze out a bunch of grapes into a pot of food, but not onto a plate or bowl. In other words, if it's going from solid to solid, it's going from the grape, the solid grape, it's food, into food, it's okay. But if it's going from the solid, the grape, into a liquid form to exist by itself, to be drunk, so then that's a problem. That's creating a liquid. It couldn't be all year round, could it? Then you'd never be able to squeeze grapes. Yeah, Shabbat. Yeah. Shabbat only. Yeah, the rest of the time you can squeeze whatever you need to. Amar Rav Chisda midivrei Rabbeinu nilmad. Rav Chisda said, from the words of our rabbi, of our teacher, we can learn cholev adam ez letocha kedera v'lo letocha kara. Similar idea that you can milk a goat into a pot of food, but you can't milk a goat into a bowl. In other words, you can't collect the milk separately for drinking purposes, because that is extracting mifarek, which is a form of dash. Taking the fruit from the husk in which it is contained, taking the liquid from the solid in which it's contained. So that means that a liquid that comes into a solid is considered a solid, and therefore this should have other halachic implications. In other words, if we're going to say that with regard to Hilchot Shabbat, that a liquid that goes from solid, in other words, a solid from which a liquid is extracted and the liquid ends up in a solid, it's still considered a food. So this should have other implications as well. Mativ Rami Bar Hama raised a contradiction. Zav shecholev et ha'ez halav tameh. If a zav is a person who is obviously one of the avot tum'ah, one of the primary categories of tum'ah, he is milking the goat. The milk that he milks is tameh, because he has contact with it, of course. Okay? Anything actually that he carries or that he moves, even if he doesn't directly touch it, becomes tameh. So even though we assume the zav is not putting his hand into the milk, right? Because he's not going to. That's not how you milk cow. You milk a cow holding the udders of the cow. But the fact that he's causing the milk to be propelled down means that he's causing it to move. That's heset, tumat heset, which is a tum'ah that the zav has, even if he doesn't directly touch the food. So v'iyamrat mashkeh bala ochalin ochelu. If you're going to tell me that liquid that goes into food is considered a food, so then b'mayit kashar. So how did this milk become mukhshar lekabel tum'ah? Because we said that in order for something to become tameh, it has to have hechsher tum'ah. It has to first be qualified to become tameh. A solid food, in order to be able to become tameh, has to have contact with liquid in order for it to be receptive to tum'ah. That's a general principle. From the time, in other words, even fruits, from the time that they're uprooted from the ground or from the tree, they have to become wet first before they can be mekabel tum'ah. So here, if we're going to say that the milk, let's say that this zav is milking a cow or milking a goat right into his cereal, okay? Or whatever, it goes right from a liquid. It never exists as a separate liquid. It goes into the solid. Okay? So in that case, the question is, since we're considering that milk to be solid, because it went from the cow, which is solid, obviously, to the cereal, which is solid, so it's a solid food, so how could it be mekabel tum'ah from the zav? Since it's not looked at as a food, since it's looked at as a food, because it started from a food and its destination was a food, and it never became wet from anything else, so how could it be mekabel tum'ah from the zav? You see? So that's the question. If it were a liquid, it's no problem, because liquid doesn't need hechsher tum'ah. Liquid to become tameh doesn't have to have another liquid qualify it. But if we're looking at it as a solid, then it's going to need another liquid to qualify. So therefore, Kedam Rabbi Yochanan says, Betipa hameluchlechet al pi adad, hachanami betipa hameluchlechet al pi adad. That in general we know that the in order to facilitate nursing, a woman, for example, will put a little bit of her milk around her nipple in order to get the baby to suckle. And similarly, when they would try to get the cow or the goat to give its milk more readily, they would do the same thing. So there was a little bit of liquid that wouldn't be destined to go into the pot. That would just be on the surface, and that liquid would touch the other liquid as it came out. So that liquid is what is machshir, the milk that goes into the pot of food, lekabel tum'ah. That's the way that it works. Mativ Rav. So in other words, it's not, even though the milk is viewed as a solid food, because it goes from solid, the goat, to solid, the food that it falls into, it touches other liquid which qualifies it to become tameh.
But didn't they establish that didn't matter because the goat is not considered food?
The goat is a food, and the
right,
milk is going to be a food.
Shabbat,
Okay, that's right. So the Tosafot says this is only talking about Yom Tov. It says the first Tosafot Cholev Adam Ez Nira Rabbeinu Tam Tainu Davka b'Yom Tov, because there, since it's Yom Tov, the cow is, or the goat is viewed as a food, right? So because you can't really do anything with it on Shabbat. However, right, I mean that's true. But fruits, though, the rule would still apply. So Mativ Ravina said, raised another objection to Memet Shesachat Zetim Va'anavim. A person who's Tamemet, and so he contracted Tum'ah from contact with the dead, and he squeezes out olives and grapes. So we have the same issue. Kabetza mechuvenet tahor. If the exact quantity of grapes that he squeezes is a kabetza, then tahor, the liquid that comes out, okay, what's going to happen is that when the liquid emerges, it's going to, Rashi explains the scenario on the side. So this is a Mishnah in Tahorot, that he doesn't touch, okay? So the Tameh person only touches the grapes. Okay, so when he squeezes out the grapes and the liquid emerges, then what's left in the grapes, since they were exactly a kabetza, they were exactly the volume of an egg, it's now been diminished, obviously, because you squeezed out the juice. And because it's diminished, the grape solid doesn't have the power to convey tum'ah to the liquid that came out. In other words, look, imagine the grape. You are tameh. You squeeze the grape, the liquid comes out. The grape was exactly the size that was necessary to convey tum'ah. But once you squeeze it, obviously it loses its volume. Okay, and even though the liquid touches the solid as it comes out, since at the moment you squeezed it to extract the liquid, that solid was less than a kabetza by definition, so the liquid never touched a solid. In other words, for solid to convey tumah has to be at least a kabetza. So since it was less than kabetza when you squeezed it at the moment of squeezing, so it couldn't transmit the tumah. The tameh person can make the grapes tameh, but the grapes can't make the grape juice tameh when it comes out.
I think what we're doing is dressing of salad.
It could be, or it could be anything. So but hayoter mikabetza tameh. However, if the grape is more than a kabetza that you squeeze, so then it will be tameh. Why? Because the liquid will come out. The grapes are still a kabetza or more. So when the liquid comes out, you are tameh. You made the grapes tameh. Now the grapes are enough of a size, enough of a quantity, that the grape juice that's oozing out is touching them, and they will become tameh. The juice will become tameh too. Okay. Otherwise, if the grape, in other words, even though it happens simultaneously, the chidush is that even though it happens simultaneously, that the juice comes out at the very moment that the measurement of the grape is diminished, it doesn't have the power now to make its own grape juice tameh. That's the story.
Basically, arguing that the juice comes out so fast that when it's small,
at the moment it comes out, it doesn't have time to make it tameh.
The juice coming out reduces the size of the grape from a...
Right, the very right.
So when it's big enough, it stays in your hand long enough that it has time.
It's not about your hand, because the grapes are making the juice tameh. In other words, you already made the grapes tameh, but the liquid is is considered a new entity.
Oh, so it's flow.
It's a constant flow, exactly. Yeah. Now, right. So the question though is so you're going to have the same problem. What if you're squeezing these grapes out over a solid? So you're going to tell me that the grape juice is also viewed as a solid. Why? Because it comes from a grape and it lands in food. So it never had the status of mashkeh. It never had the status of a liquid. So if that's the case, how could it ever become tameh from the grape? since a food needs hechsher tum'ah. A food requires another liquid to qualify it. So of course he answers it. He answered his own question. Clearly this must be talking about a case in which he wasn't squeezing it into a food. So it didn't require any other qualifier. But if he were squeezing from the solid into another solid, from the grape into a solid food, it would in fact not be defined as a liquid but as a solid. So now we go on. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. Actually, we can find that Tanaim argued about this very topic. If a person decides, you know how sometimes the challah, it looks very shiny because they put egg on the outside to make it shiny? So sometimes they would use grape juice apparently for this to make it look shiny. That's called a mahlik. He puts it on the outside. So a mahlik ba'anavim lo chshar. So the fact that you put this grape juice, you squeezed grape juice onto the outside of the kikarot, onto the outside of these loaves, that is not going to make the grapes capable of receiving tum'ah. In other words, you might say that the liquid that comes out of them, they obviously touch their own liquid, right? Because you're squeezing, let's say you smush the grapes onto the bread to give it a shine. Okay? So the liquid that comes out is touching the grapes, but it's not viewed as a liquid. Why not? Because it's becoming a part of the kikar, because it's becoming a part of the solid, of the loaf. So there's no liquid there. We don't look at it as a liquid. So say the Chachamim. Okay, however, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says, no, it is. It is a liquid. When it comes out, it's considered a liquid. So my love bahakami palgi, isn't this the machloket here? That one says that the liquid that comes out, but it's to serve, it's to be joined with a solid food, is also a solid food. So therefore, since you did it to put a veneer on your challah, basically, so it's considered a part of a solid. It's not considered a liquid. And Umar savar lav ochelo, but Rabbi Yehuda says no. It's looked at as a liquid, even though the reason why is because you're basting your challah, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I don't know what the real technical term is. I have to ask a baker, but because you're giving it a shine. So, but still, it's looked at as a liquid according to Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Papa says no. You could argue the other way around and say that everybody agrees that a liquid that comes for a food is not a food. Okay, and incidentally, the Gra on the side corrects this and says that the Girsav, the Geonim is that Rav Papa said, no, everybody agrees that liquid that goes into a solid, that when you extract from a liquid from a solid and it goes into another solid, that it's considered a food. Okay, so there's two different Girsaot here, there's two different versions. One that says, oh no, you can understand that everybody agrees that it's not considered a food, even though it comes from a solid and lands in a solid. The other version is that no, if it comes from a solid and it lands in a solid, everybody agrees that it's a food. Either way, it doesn't matter. Rav Papa is saying that you don't have to read into this Mishnah here, or into this Braita, you don't have to read a Mishnah, you don't have to read this machloket into it, because you could still say the real issue here is whether a liquid that's going to waste is considered a liquid. Because what are you going to do? You put this liquid on the outside of your challah, now you're going to bake it. So what's going to happen? It's going to evaporate. So Rav Papa says that because it's going to evaporate and it's not going to stay a liquid, it's just going to leave a shine on the challah. So therefore it's not considered a liquid according to the Chachamim. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, it is considered a liquid. But everybody agrees that if it went from a solid into another solid, normally it would still be considered a food. However, and this is similar to another machloket. As we learned in the Braita, if a person squeezes or bruises olives with tameh hands, huchshar, they become, the liquid that comes from them is going to make the olives capable of becoming tameh. In other words, it's going to be considered a liquid. But if the only reason you were squeezing the olives not so the juice would come out and it would be tastier, but to soften it and dip it into salt, lo huchshar. that is not going to be, the liquid that comes out is not going to be considered a liquid. You only squeezed it to soften it a little bit. You didn't want the liquid to come out. In the first case where you squeezed it, you wanted some of the liquid to come out to make it sweeter. Okay, in the second case, you didn't want liquid to come out. So even if liquid does come out, that wasn't your intention. You just wanted to make it a little squishier so you could dip it into the salt.
Wait, so what you're saying is that your intention makes a difference as to whether
you wanted the liquid or not. Because you have to have wanted it. Remember, l'ratzon.
Okay, so
you have to want it.
But that makes a difference as to whether the olives become susceptible to tumah or not.
Because it makes a difference whether the liquid is viewed as a liquid or not. Because if you didn't want the liquid to come out as a separate thing, then it's not considered a beverage that you want. It has to be what's called bechiyutan, which means it has to be something that you wanted. Also, that's another halacha that we went over yesterday. So leida'im higiu zetav limsokim lav. Now you have a very interesting machloket though. What if the reason why you squeezed the olive was to see if they were ripe? So you picked some olives and now you're squeezing them to see if they're ripe, to see if you should pick the rest of them. So it's interesting because the Chachamim say lo chshar. It's not those olives that you squeeze to test them. The liquid that comes out doesn't render them mikable tumah, capable of receiving or becoming tameh. Why? Because that liquid is going to go to waste. You didn't want the liquid. You were just doing a test. But Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Huchshar. Why? Because you wanted the oil to come out to test. So you wanted it. In other words, even though you're going to trash the oil, you're not going to keep that oil that you squeezed out. You still need it to determine whether the olive is ripe. So according to the Chachamim, since you're going to discard this oil, it's not considered a real beverage, and it doesn't have any halachic power. According to Rabbi Yehuda, since you wanted it for something, you didn't want to keep it, but you wanted it as a test, it's considered valuable. My love, wait, did I skip? No. So my love, isn't it that they're arguing about the following? The machloket is, since this liquid is going to waste, you're going to discard it, therefore it's not considered a liquid. That's the machloket. Amar Rav Huna, Brother Rav Yoshua. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, said, I agree with you that in the latter case, the argument is whether oil that's going to waste is considered oil. Since you're only extracting it to test and then you're going to throw it away, is it considered valuable or not? Because it is valuable, but only as a test for you to know something. It's not valuable because you're going to use it. You see, that's the machloket. Does value mean valuable because it's utility? You're going to actually drink it, or does it mean any kind of value? It's valuable for information. Okay, so the term value is being defined here. So, but you, Rav Papa, are trying to take that idea and apply it to the case of where you used grape juice to shine your chalot. I don't think that's the machloket there, because that's not going to waste. That's functioning. That's functioning, right? They are arguing whether using a liquid to shine a solid is considered a liquid or not. Because since it's not really functioning as a liquid, it's really just qualifying a solid, and it's not even qualifying a solid by becoming a part of the solid. You didn't mix it in, like when you squeeze the milk over your cereal, or something like that. You didn't mix it in, you did it as a veneer on the outside. So that's where the machloket is. What do we say about that? Do we call that a liquid, since it's not really part of the solid? Or do we say that it's really became part of the solid, just that it's on the outside? That's the question. So now Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Chia Bar Ashi, Amar Rav. Rabbi Zera said that Rav Chia Bar Ashi said that Rav said, you can squeeze your grapes into solid food, but not into a separate bowl, because then you're making it a liquid that could be drunk. And you can take a fish and squeeze out whatever liquid comes out of the fish. Right? The tzir, the brine that will come out of the fish, and it's no problem. You could squeeze it out, because that's definitely looked at as a solid. Because we don't say, we don't look at the fish as a fruit that contains juice. You're just really squeezing out some of the liquid that it's absorbed. But it's not really juice. Yativ Rav Dimi v'kamar lalashim ata. Rav Dimi sat and he told over this teaching. Amar le Abaye Rav Dimi. Abaye heard it and he said to Rav Dimi, Atun mishmei de Rav matnitun v'lakasha lechu. Anan mishmei de Shmuel matninan la. You taught this in the name of Rav, and that's why you didn't have a problem. We taught this in the name of Shemuel. We had a tradition that it was Shemuel who permitted the squeezing out of the fish. And we had a problem. Why? Mi amar Shmuel dag letziro afilu tocha kara. How could Shmuel say that you can squeeze out the fish brine? Va'it mar kivashim shesachatan. Amar Rav legufan mutar lememehen patur aval asur. Ushlakot ben legufan ben lememehen mutar. Ushmuel amar echad kivashim ve'echad shlakot legufan mutar lememehen patur aval asur. What is the machloket here? According to Rav, you have two cases basically. Case number one is you pickled vegetables either with wine or vinegar. So when you squeeze out the vegetables that you pickled, what do you get? Wine or vinegar. Okay? Because that's what they absorbed. The second case, shilakot, means that they absorbed, you boiled vegetables, so they absorbed just water. Okay, there's just water inside the vegetables that they absorbed, perhaps, or it's their natural juices coming out. Okay? So it's not a separate liquid. It's considered really part of the vegetable.
If it's the juice coming out, isn't that this?
No. Like let's say you have vegetables. Vegetables are not usually. We don't view. Let's say you crush green peppers. You know, if you squeeze the green pepper, some liquid is going to come out, right? But it's not juice, really. Yeah, not juice.
In other words, it has both abilities. Like you could squeeze it, and it has the same effect as an orange,
but it's not viewed as a juice because it's vegetables.
Because it's pickled.
Well, in the first case, it's more problematic. Okay, right. Why? So Rav says it depends. If you, we're going to see. So pickled vegetables, Rav says, if you squeeze them just because you want to eat it, you're eating it, and you squeeze it a lot, as you're eating it, or you squeeze it so that some will come to the top, so you can eat it with some of the juice squeezed out, but you're doing it as part of eating the food, fine. But if you're doing it because you want to squeeze it into a cup and drink the wine, that's no good. However, shlakot, vegetables according to Rav, there you can squeeze it out even to drink the water that comes out. So let's say you cooked some green pepper and now you want to squeeze the green pepper and take the liquid that will naturally come out. He says, that's not juice, that's just part of the green pepper. We don't look at that as juice, you can do it. Shmuel said, no, in both cases you're not allowed to extract the juice. Okay? In other words, you're allowed to while you're eating the salad. But if you squeeze it into a cup, whether it's the pickled one, where you're squeezing wine, or it's just the regular vegetable that you cook the green pepper and you squeeze it, you're not allowed to do it. It's rabbinically prohibited according to Shmuel. So what's the problem? It should be the same halacha with regard to dagim. When you squeeze out the fish, that's not juice. It's just water and the bodily whatever of the fish, right? Brine, yeah. Yeah, salt and water. Yeah, so you're not really squeezing out. It's the same as vegetables. So how could Shmuel tell you that you can squeeze the fish? How could it be?
It's not the same.
So, Amar le, ha-Elohim, Einai ra'u velozar, mipumei de Rabbi Yirmiyah, shemiali. V'Rabbi Yirmiyah me'Rabbi Zera, v'Rabbi Zera me'Rav Chia bar Ashi, v'Rav Chia bar Ashi me'Rav. There is no problem here, because by God, I saw with my own eyes that Rabbi Yirmiyah told this over. And where did he hear it from? He heard it from Rabbi Zera, and Rabbi Zera heard it from Rav Chia bar Ashi, and Rav Chia bar Ashi heard it from Rav. This was not a teaching of Shmuel. And since Rav is the one that says you can squeeze out the vegetables that have been cooked in order to extract the water or the salt or whatever, and it's no problem, he also said by the fish that you're allowed to squeeze it for the brine to come out, and it's considered like part of the food.
I don't understand. Why are they saying that it's the same when it's not really the same? Because the vegetable has the potential of being squeezed on its own, whereas the fish doesn't.
You could squeeze a fish. Try cooking a fish, squeeze it. The juice will come out.
I know, but it's not something that you do. It's not
right, but really nobody squeezes green peppers either. Nobody does. I mean, you could squeeze it, but yeah, it's just really the natural. Not everything that has natural moisture, basically, is considered a juice. If I take meat and I squeeze it, it also will bring juice. If you take a nice steak and you squeeze it over a cup, you'll drink. It tastes good, actually. No, but nobody does that. Meat juice, right? It sounds very manly.
I used to do it.
You could, yeah.
Vegetables,
yeah.
It's different.
Pickled is different because it absorbs real wine or vinegar in there. So there's another liquid actually that you're taking out. It's not just the natural juices or water that exists in there. So now, Gufa, we go back. Vashim shesachatan amarav legufan mutar lemehen patur aval asur shlakot ben legufan ben meman asur mutar. Shmuel amar echad ze v'echad ze legufan mutar lemehen patur aval asur. Rabbi Yochanan amar echad kevashim v'echad shlakot legufan mutar lemehen chayav chatat. So you have three opinions here. Okay, according to the first opinion of Rav, First of all, everybody agrees that you're allowed to, when you're eating these things that have these natural juices, or even if you're eating these pickled vegetables, that in the course of eating it, if you squeeze it a little so some of the liquid will come to the top, that's okay. You're just not allowed to squeeze it out into a separate cup or bowl. Everybody agrees on that. However, the question is, what about when you squeeze it for juice? So Rav says it depends. Pickled things that absorbed wine or vinegar, it's no good. Vegetables where it's natural juice, it's fine. Shmuel says in both cases you're not allowed to do it. Both the pickled and the cooked vegetables. Rabbi Yochanan says if you're doing this for the sake of the liquid, that you actually separately squeeze it out, chayav chatat. That's an isur deoraita of dash. You're not allowed to do it. Now, there is an objection to this. You're allowed to squeeze out, it says, pickled vegetables on Shabbat for the sake of Shabbat, but not for after Shabbat. But you can't squeeze out olives or grapes. And if you squeeze olives or grapes out on Shabbat, chayav chatat, that's a biblical prohibition of dash for sure. Mefarek, it's a toladav dash. Now, the question is, kasha l'Rav, kasha l'Shmuel, kasha l'Rabbi Yochanan. This is problematic for everybody. Why? Because everybody said that you could squeeze out the pickled vegetables, at least when you're eating them, you're allowed to squeeze out. And here it says absolutely that you cannot. I'm sorry, the other way around. Everybody says that you can't do it for the juice, and here it says that you can, right? It said, sochatin kevashim b'Shabbat, l'tzorach HaShabbat. As long as you're doing it to drink right now, you can do it. So isn't this a problem for everybody? Because nobody says you can squeeze out the pickled vegetables to drink the juice. Nobody says that. Shmuel and Rav agree that you can't, and Rabbi Yochanan says chayav chatat. Rabbi Yochanan will say that's a biblical violation. So what's that? How do they answer it? So everybody will answer. Rav mitaretz tameh, Shmuel mitaretz tameh, Rabbi Yochanan mitaretz tameh. Everybody can answer. Rav mitaretz tameh, so hatin kevashim b'Shabbat l'tzorach HaShabbat, avalo l'motzei Shabbat. That what is it talking about when it says you can squeeze out the pickled vegetables on Shabbat that have been pickled with vinegar or wine? Bamed divarim amurim. In what case legufan? That's only if you're doing it while you eat it, because it makes it sweeter. However, but everybody would agree that if you're doing it to drink the liquid, you're not allowed to. And when it comes to shlakot, they're not mentioned in the Braita anyway, right? When it comes to vegetables, he says that you can squeeze it out even for the liquid. And then when it comes to olives and grapes, everybody agrees you can't squeeze those for the juice, for sure. Okay, and how does Shmuel explain it? Shmuel will say, yeah, the Braita that says you're allowed to squeeze out the brine, squeeze out the vinegar or the wine from these pickled vegetables, would say that you're allowed to do it, and you're allowed to do that for vegetables too. Legufan. That's only if you're doing it when you're eating it. In other words, each person can interpret the Braita their own way. Rav can interpret the Braita that it's talking about where you squeeze it while eating it. Okay? And Shmuel will say it's when you're squeezing it while eating it. No problem. Their only difference is the difference of how they rule on vegetables that were cooked, that weren't soaked in wine or vinegar, right? That's where you have a machloket between Rav and Shmuel.
So halacha, you're allowed to make orange juice?
Oh, hold on, no, definitely not. Okay, now, right? No problem. Rabbi Yochanan mitaretz tameh. Sochatin kvashim l'tzorach HaShabbat avalo l'motzei Shabbat achad kvashim ve'achad shlakot b'med dvarim amurim legufan aval memehen lo yitzchot b'imsachat nasa k'mishesachat. In other words, what he's saying is that according to all three, when it said that you could take the pickled vegetables that are pickled with wine or vinegar and you could squeeze them on Shabbat and it was no problem, it's talking about where you're squeezing them in the course of eating them, because everybody agrees you're not allowed to squeeze them for their juice. Correct? The only thing that Rav and Shmuel argue about is whether you can squeeze cooked vegetables for their juice. Rav says yes, Shmuel says no. And then finally you have Rabbi Yochanan who would say that if you did that, chayav chatat. Not just that you can't do it. He agrees with Shmuel that you can't do it, and he says even more so, you're chayav chatat, that it's a biblical violation in that case. It's no different, according to him, to squeeze a green pepper that you cook, to squeeze it to get the juice out, than it is to squeeze olives and grapes. Chayav chatat, it's the same thing, no difference. Now the halacha in the Shulchan Aruch is that you can squeeze a fruit into a salad. People generally know that, but you're not allowed to squeeze anything into a separate cup. That you're never allowed to do. You could squeeze a fruit into a salad because it's going from salad to salad. Lemon into a salad, no problem. But lemon into a juice, no. And you can't even squeeze it into a separate cup and pour it. You have to squeeze it right over the.
Lemon into tea is no.
Lemon into tea, no, because that's going from solid to liquid. But what you could do, a trick is, you could take sugar. You can squeeze the lemon onto the sugar. Because you could put it onto the salad, and then so take a different cup, put sugar, squeeze the lemon into the sugar, then you take the lemon sugar and you put it into your tea. They're allowed to do that. Yep, it's a little complicated, but you can do it. All right, so Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi. Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi said, the Rav said, Devar Torah ino chayav ela drisat zeitim v'anavim bilvad. Min Torah, the only prohibition of sechita is on olives and grapes. All other fruits are only rabbinically prohibited in squeezing out, but they're still prohibited. And similarly was it taught in the yeshiva of Menashe, that from the Torah the only prohibition is on squeezing olives and grapes. Other fruits are prohibited midirabanan. And hearsay testimony, okay? Somebody told you that they saw something and you testified to someone else. That's ed mipi ed. In other words, you didn't see it directly, but Mirdad saw something and he told me, and now I come to the Bet Din and I tell the Bet Din. That's called ed mipi ed. Hearsay. We call it hearsay. Right? So you're not allowed to, hearsay is not admissible in a Bet Din, just like it's not admissible in court here. Although they're revising some, I recently read, sometimes I read some legal, I find legal comparison interesting, and there's some discussion about some cases where they might be admitting certain types of hearsay, but anyway, in halakha you're not allowed to, except for edut isha. What's edut isha? That means that we have an aguna. Let's say a woman is missing her husband. I don't mean she misses him, I mean he's missing. Okay? She fears he may have died. She doesn't know. She can't get remarried. She's an aguna. So what does she do? We need some testimony to establish that he died. So let's say Mirdad was in Iran visiting and he saw the guy died. And I saw Mirdad, and Mirdad tells me I saw that Mr. Smith died. Mr. Smith. So then I come to the Bet Din and say, I heard Mirdad told me Mr. Smith died. Did you see that he died? No, but Mirdad told me. They said, okay, to release an aguna, we'll allow it. Okay? We'll admit it. Now, they asked the question, what about for the testimony regarding a firstborn? Now what does it mean, a testimony regarding a firstborn? What it means is that Kohanim are Hashudim. We don't trust Kohanim, sorry. Why not? Because if you give a Bechor, right, you give a firstborn animal to the Kohen, now if it's a good Bechor, he has to bring it as a Korban. And he gets only to keep, part of it, only some of the meat. But if it has a mum, if it develops a blemish, now he can keep the whole thing. So we're worried that the Kohen is going to make it look like an accident, bump the animal into the wall. Oh, sorry, he has a mum, now you can't bring him as a korban. Because he doesn't want to bring it to the Beit HaMikdash, he wants to keep it. So we need testimony, how did this animal develop the mum? Right? The question is, what if Sammy saw, Mirdad has a cow, somebody gave him, or it can't be a cow, it has to be a male, but an ox, a firstborn, somebody gave him, and it has and Sammy saw that the way that it got a mum was really an accident. And Sammy told me. But now Sammy is away, and the Bet Din comes and says, Mirdad, you want to be able to use that, but how did it get the mum? And Mirdad says it was an accident. They said, well, we don't believe you. Bring me testimony. Well, the only person who saw it was Sammy, and he's in Florida now, and he's not here. So what do? Well, the rabbi talked to Sammy, and Sammy told him. Does that work? If I heard from somebody, does it work? So that was the question. Now, Amar le, I'm sorry. Samahu. Rav Ami Asir. Rav Ami said, nope, it's no good, that kind of testimony. Rav Asi Sharei. Rav Asi says, we'll take hearsay testimony. Amar le Rav Ami ila Rav Asi. Rav Ami said to Rav Asi, Va'atan adver minashia. En ed mipi ed kasher ela la'idut isha bilvad. We said that the only time that hearsay testimony is admissible is to free an aguna, edut isha. So how can you apply it to a firstborn? It says that that doesn't work. So what's the answer? No. He said, Ema la edut sheha isha keshera la bilvad. What it doesn't mean that the only time hearsay testimony is good is to free an aguna. It means we take hearsay testimony when we would take a woman's testimony. When would we take a woman's testimony? Only in a case where where we're lenient about the rules of testimony. So we're lenient about the rules of testimony for an aguna, to free a woman who's chained to her husband, and we're lenient about, and let's say if a woman tells you something is kasher, you're allowed to believe her? Of course. So we would also accept ed mipi ed. Abraham told me that he saw that the meat was salted properly, and I tell you, it's okay because it's not real edut. So he said that's what it means. Anything a woman's testimony would be admissible for, hearsay testimony is admissible for. Rav Yemar achshar ed mipi ed lebechor. Rav Yemar would allow hearsay testimony to permit the firstborn animal to the Kohen. Karei ale Maremar. Maremar called him Yemar Sharei Bukhra. You are Yemar who permits firstborns. In other words, you're too lenient. You're too lenient. Vehil chetaba. What is the halacha? Ed mipi ed kasher lebachor. That we say that hearsay testimony is in fact admissible to permit the firstborn animal for the Kohen's use. Chalot devash. We learned about the honeycombs that drip on Shabbat, and this was back in the Mishnah. Where was that? What was the exact line? Chalot dvash sheriskanu erev Shabbat v'yatzu me'atzman asurin. We said that if you have chalot dvash, you have honeycombs that were crushed on erev Shabbat and they leak honey on Shabbat, so you're not allowed to partake of the honey. And Rabbi Eliezer said you could. So Kiata Rav Hoshaya min Harda'a, when Rav Hoshaya came from the Harda'a, Ata v'aiti matnita biyadeh. He came with his Mishnah in his hand, and he said, Zaitim v'anavim sheriskan me'erev Shabbat, that olives and grapes that you crushed from erev Shabbat, yatum atzman asurin, that you're not allowed to partake of the honey that oozes from them on Shabbat. Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbi Shimon matirin. So in his version, not just Rabbi Eliezer permits, but Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon both permit. Amar Rav Yosef says, Gavra yitira atalash me'inan. What's the big deal with this teaching? What are you telling us? That instead of it being Rabbi Eliezer, it's also Rabbi Shimon? So what? Why is that important? Why is that significant? So Amar le Abaye said, no. Tuva kamashmalan. It's telling you something important. Why? Because the imi matnitin hava amina hatam hu damikara ukhla ulusof ukhla. You might say that where is it that he permits? He permits only in the case of a honeycomb. Right? But here what are we talking about? Not a honeycomb. Zaitim va'anavim. We're talking about olives and grapes. That Rabbi Eliezer, because in our Mishnah it sounds like Rabbi Eliezer only permitted the honeycomb that oozed on Shabbat. Here in this version he's permitting even olives and grapes that were crushed and oozed on Shabbat. They were crushed from before. Read it.
No, but how do you derive it from?
Zaitim vanavim shiriskan me'erev Shabbat. That's what it says here. Our Mishnah, in our Mishnah, it only said the honeycomb.
No, but the question that he asked is,
or it sounded like
is like, what's new about them doing it both? And the answer is, well, what you're learning is that...
Well, I'm going to tell you. Right, so it says, because in the case of honey, there's no change of state. The honey just gets released from the honeycomb. It's food before and it's food now. Yeah, it's food before and it's food now.
It was
the same thing. It was just contained in the honeycomb.
In the comb.
Right. But when you squeeze juice, you're really changing it because it was really absorbed in the fruit. If you had eaten the fruit, you eat the fruit with the juices is in it. Okay? So he says there, you might say that even Rabbi Eliezer is not going to allow when olives were pressed or crushed before Shabbat and the liquid oozes out over Shabbat. He won't allow you to take it because there it's going from a solid to a liquid. In the honeycomb, it stayed the same. It was a liquid before or a solid before trapped inside the honeycomb, and now it's the same as it was. So you might have made a distinction. So Kamash Malan, we learn that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon allow you to partake not only of honeycombs that were crushed and oozed on Shabbat, but even of olives and grapes that were crushed before Shabbat and oozed out. If the crushing was done already before Shabbat, you're allowed to partake of the results that occur on Shabbat itself. Now, Zav. Yeah, they would say Zav. Yeah, that's the word they use.
Honey we're talking about, right?
Mashkin shezavu, that's what it's called. Mashkim shezavu me'aperot, that's what they call it. Yeah.
This is bee honey that we're talking about.
Bee honey.
Honey from a comb.
Yeah.
But the notion of honey, dvash, and cola is...
That's date honey usually. Yeah. But here they're talking about chalot dvash.
Fruit, though.
Yeah, that's a different story. Here we're talking about chalot dvash is talking about honeycombs. Yeah. So now the Mishnah says kol Shabbat b'chamin me'erev Shabbat shurinoto b'chamin b'Shabbat. Anything that was cooked on erev Shabbat, you can put it into hot water on Shabbat to cook to some more, and that means it's fully cooked. Obviously, if it's fully cooked, then you can put it back in the hot water so that it will melt more or it will progress more. It's no problem because it's already cooked. Okay, now we're assuming that this means that it can't cook anymore. And something that wasn't cooked on Erev Shabbat, you can still pour hot water over it on Shabbat. Now there's a big question about that. Can you actually pour it from a Kli Rishon? Most say only from a Kli Sheni, not from a Kli Rishon. Except for these types of salted fish, because since all you do in order to eat it is pour hot water over it once, it's considered the bishul for those foods. That's the bishul for those foods. That's the cooking for those foods, because that's all they require. So normally an uncooked food to pour water over it is okay. Most say even from a Kli Rishon, but even if we're going to be stringent and say only from a Kli Sheni, still, for these fish, to pour even hot water over them is cooking them. But most of the time, if something has been cooked from before Shabbat, now we know there's an idea of in bishul achar bishul, there's no cooking after cooking. Once something's already fully cooked, you can't cook it anymore, so even if you put it back over the fire, it's not going to be any worse. Obviously there are issues about having a blech and other complications here, but we're just talking about in theory. In other words, the technicalities here are complicated, but the basic idea is that something once it is cooked can't become more cooked. Okay, once it's fully cooked. Now, if cooking it more will improve it, that's called mitztamek v'yafelo. If it's something that becomes improved, then this wouldn't be true. But something that doesn't become improved, it would be true. So the Gemara says, Kegon mai, what are we talking about here that's cooked before? And you can soak it more in hot water during Shabbat. So he says, Amar Rav Safra says, Kogon tarnegolta de Rabbi Abba, like the chicken of Rabbi Abba. What he would do was, he would cook a chicken and then he would soak it in hot water for days on end until it disintegrated. It didn't become more cooked; it just disintegrated. So that's what it said. So Amar Rav Safra said, Zimna chada it latam. Once I went to his house, to Rabbi Abba's house, and I tasted some of this disgusting chicken. If Rabbi Abba had not given me to drink some 3-year-old wine, I would have had to throw up. It was so disgusting. That was very complimentary. I guess he liked his cooking. All right, now, but it was for healing purposes, by the way. It was considered some medicinal thing. They thought it would heal you from certain things. I could see why. Yeah, because you purge everything. Rabbi Yochanan used to spit at the mention of kutach habavli. Kutach habavli was a type of dip that they would make out of sort of things that we might consider rotten, like old milk and old kind of nasty stuff, and old bread. They would mix it together and make this kutach, this kind of dip that Rabbi Yochanan would spit when he heard about it because it was so gross to the Israeli Jews. Amar Rav Yosef said, "V'lirok anan mitar go to the Rabbi Abba. You know what? If you're going to make fun of our kutach, we're going to make fun of your chicken of Rabbi Abba. That's just as bad. Don't look at us." And he said, Ve'od, Amar Rav Gaza. Not only that, but Rav Gaza said, Zimna chadad ikla itlatam. Once I was in Israel, and they say they don't like our kutach. Ve'avdit kutach de bavlae. I made some of our kutach, some of our dip. She'ilu minei kol berichai ma'arava. All of the sick people in Israel came to have some. Because it was considered to also have healing properties. So don't tell me you don't like our food. Our Babylonian food is so bad. First of all, you have your disgusting chicken, and second of all, you're all talk because when I came to your town, everybody wanted some of my Babylonian dip. Now we get into a very nice Agarata here, coming up very soon. Not quite yet, but almost. So anything that wasn't cooked before, that you pour hot water over it, so you're allowed to pour hot water over it, except for these fish that automatically cook. So hidiach mai, what would be if you poured the water? Amar Rav Yosef hidiach chayav chatat. That since that is the cooking for those fish, if you poured the hot water over them, it's considered cooking on Shabbat. There's no difference between that and any other cooking, and you're chayav chatat. Amar mar berei de Ravina. The master, the son of Ravina, said, Af anana mitanena. We also learned in the Mishnah very clearly, except for these two fish, that's very clear. That the washing them in the hot water, in other words, pouring the hot water over them, is considered cooking them, period. Now we have a very interesting story here. Yativ Rabbi Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Asi. Rabbi Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Asi were sitting together. Kamed Rabbi Yochanan in the presence of Rabbi Yochanan, their teacher. Yativ Rabbi Yochanan became a name. Rabbi Yochanan was falling asleep. There are many stories like this, Agadot, with Rabbi Yochanan falling asleep, and the two students have a conversation between themselves. We've seen this several times already. So Amar le Rabbi Chia bar Abba le Rabbi Asi. Rabbi Chia bar Abba said to Rabbi Asi, Mipnei ma ofot shebebavel shemenim. So they said, let's have some small talk while Rabbi Yochanan is sleeping. Why is it that the chickens or the birds in Babylonia are fat? Amar le said to him, Kalach le midbar azah v'arecha shemeni mehen. If you go to the wilderness of Azah, to the desert of Azah, I'll show you fatter ones. Don't think that the Babylonian birds are so much fatter than the Israeli birds. The birds in Israel are just as fat or more fat. Why is it that the Babylonians are so happy on the holidays? He answered him and said, Rabbi Asi said, because they're very poor. It's the only time they get a break from work. They're toiling so much. They have such a hard life. The only time they enjoy life is on the Chagim. So Rabbi Chia bar Abba asked Rabbi Asi, why are the Talmidei Chachamim, why are the rabbis in Babylonia, why do they dress in such fancy clothes? And he answered him, because they're not such great Chachamim. So they're not so smart. They're not so wise, so they have to show off with their flashy clothes. Then he asked him, why are the Ovdei Kochavim, the idolaters, very mizohamim means like disgusting in a way. Okay, he said, he said the reason is because they eat shekatzim, uremasim, because they eat unclean foods like bugs and insects and rodents and shrimp and all that. That's why they are very disgusting. Suddenly Rabbi Yochanan woke up. He said, children, haven't I told you? Say to wisdom, you are my sister. Im barur lecha davar ka'achotcha she'asur alach, omreo v'imlav al tomreo or lo tomreo. So he said to them, what does it mean in the pasuk when it says, say to wisdom, you are my sister? If your idea is as clear to you as the fact that your sister is prohibited to you, say it. But if it's not as clear to you as the fact that your sister is prohibited to you, don't say it. In other words, if you don't really know what you're talking about, right, keep silent. Amrulay said, they said to him, will you answer the questions? If we were wrong, what are the real answers? He says, okay, I'll do it. You know the real reason why Rabbi Asi avoided the question. He said, it's not true that the Babylonian birds are fatter than the birds in Israel. But he said, no, it is true. Why are they so much fatter? Because they never went into exile. Shenemar, as it says, Shanan Moav Mini Orav. It says that Moab is rested from its youth. V'shoketu el shemarav, and quiet on its sediments. Uvagola lo halach, and it never went into Golah. It never went into exile. So since they never went into exile, okay, these countries that never went into exile, their birds were able to develop and grow more than the ones in Israel. The birds from Israel have been exiled and came back. So they never grew to the same stature that they had before. How do we know that the birds of Israel were exiled? The Tanya says, Rabbi Yehuda says, for 52 years, nobody passed through the land of Judah. On the mountains I will raise a lament and a weeping. It says in Yirmiyahu that from the birds of the sky to the animals, everybody has gone, everybody's left. even the animals, because it was desolate. It was desolate. Yeah, it was desolate. So this is talking about the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. So behema begematria 52. The gematria of behema is 52, and Rashi actually shows you, and Tosafot mentions it, that you can actually figure out the number 52 even without the gematria. That the number of years that the land was completely desolate was 52. So the birds were exiled for 52 years, and that's why when they came back, they never reached their original stature again. Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yaakov said that Rabbi Yochanan said, "Kulan chazru chutz mikul yasa ispanin." The only thing that never came back was the kul yasa ispanin. That fish never came back to Israel after it was exiled. The Amar Rav, because Rav said, "Hane madre de Bavel." These slopes of Babylonia, they send water back to En Etam in Israel. And since the Kulias Ha'ispanin, since that fish doesn't have a solid spine, it wasn't able to swim upstream to be able to return to Israel. After all, the birds and the animals and the fish went into exile. So now, as to the next question, why is it that the Babylonians have such a good time on the holidays? Because they weren't included in the curse of having bad holidays. As it says in the pasuk, that I will get rid of all of the joy. Hosea says, Chagah, Chodshah, V'Shabbatah, V'Chol Moadah. It says that I will eliminate the joy, the holiday, the new moon, the Shabbat, and the festivals. We know this pasuk from Yeshayahu from the very beginning, that your new moons and your holidays, my soul hates them, they've become a burden to me. So we see that there was a curse placed on the Jews of Israel when they would go into, that they would not have good holidays. They would suffer and have bad holidays. But the Jews in Babylonia weren't under that curse. And what does it mean? Why does Hashem say that I hated your festivals and they have been a burden to me? Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Elazar said that the Holy One, blessed be He, said, Lo dayan li Yisrael shechotin lifanai. It's bad enough that the Jews sin before me, but they trouble me, to decide what bad punishment I should bring upon them. So not only do they sin, but then they give me the work. I have to figure out how to punish them, what decree to place upon them. Rabbi Yitzchak says, there's never been a holiday that a boleshet, that the army, that some kind of a standing army will come to occupy Tzipori. That there's never been a holiday that the various troops of the non-Jews haven't come to occupy and to trouble us in our towns. In other words, they would come and obviously they would frequently place taxes on the people, or they would steal from them, or they would plunder them. So, and Rashi says it wasn't that they did it on purpose. The non-Jewish army didn't say, it's a holiday. It's not like the Yom Kippur War or something like that, where they did it on purpose. That it's not that they know that it's a holiday. It's the klala. There's a curse that the Jews will always be troubled and suffering on the holidays because of this curse from Hosea that was mentioned before, and from Yirmiyahu, or really mainly from Hosea that was mentioned before. So now we get to the next. So that's why the Jews in Babylonia, though, they're not under that curse, so they enjoy the holidays more. So we come to the next question. Why are the scholars in Babylonia why do they dress in fancy clothes? It's not because they're lesser Talmidei Chachamim than the rabbis of Israel. That's not why. Why is it? It's because because they don't belong here. In other words, they're imports. A lot of them made Yerida, came from Israel. They live in Babylonia now. People won't recognize them. Damrei Eneshek, as people say, Be'mata Shemai, Be'lamata Totvai. They say, in my city, I'm known by my name. Outside my city, I'm known by my clothes. Right? You walk into a hospital, how do you know who a doctor is? Do you know the name of every doctor? No. You see that they're wearing the doctor's clothes? That's a doctor. Right? You walk into the giant store, you want to know who works there, they wear a certain type of clothes. That's how you know. You don't know their name. So when they're in their place, everybody knows them. But when they come to Babylonia, not everybody knows them. They're itinerant scholars, so therefore they need to dress nicely to show that they're Chachamim. Haba'im Yashresh Yaakov Yatzizu Farach Yisrael. That it says that those who come, Yashresh Yaakov, Now, literally what that means is to plant roots, okay? Yaakov will plant roots, yatzitu farach, that Israel will blossom and flower. This is the end of the pasuk, and the face of the earth will be covered with the produce. Okay, so what does this mean? That those who come will plant Yaakov, and that Israel will blossom and flower. Tani Rav Yosef taught that these are the Talmidei Chachamim, these are the rabbis of Babylonia who make flowers and tzitzin and blossoms and flowers for the Torah. Now, what does Rashi explain? He says, Otan shel Yaakov. What does it say? Haba'im, those who come to Babylonia are the ones who will do that, who will be able to make flowers and beauty for the Torah. And how do they do that? Because not only are they causing Torah to flourish in Babylonia, but they're dressing the part. They're bringing it beauty and honor through that as well. So you asked, why are the idolaters a little bit more disgusting? The reason is because they didn't stand at Mount Sinai. As we turn to Kuf Mem Vav Amud Aleph, that the Nachash, the snake, had relations with Chava. He implanted in her some kind of a negative poison. So the Jews who stood on Mount Sinai, so that influence departed from them. But the idolaters who did not stand at Mount Sinai still have that poison placed in them from the Nachash, from the original snake. Amar le Rav Achabre the Rava said to Ravashi, Gerimai, what about converts to Judaism? Amarle said to him, even though they were not personally present at the giving of the Torah, their mazal was there. In other words, their angel, their guardian angel was there, representing them at Har Sinai, and that's why they don't have that negative influence either. So, dichtiv, as it says in the pasuk, et asher yeshno po imanu omed hayom. Moshe Rabbeinu says, those who are standing with us today, lifnei Hashem Eloheinu, ve'et asher einenu po, and those who are not with us today. So, meaning even those who will join the Jewish people in the future, their mazal was present at Har Sinai. And this is in distinction or contradistinction to what Rabbi Abba Bar Kana said. Because Rabbi Abba Bar Kana said, that it took only 3 generations for the negative influence of the Nachash to depart from our ancestors. Avraham olid et Yishmael. Avraham passed to Yishmael and Yitzchak olid et Esav. And Yaakov olid Yud Bet Shvatim. It was only with Yaakov. In other words, Avraham still had some of the influence of the original Nachash. That's why he had Yishmael together with Yitzchak. Yitzchak still had some of the influence of the Nachash. That's why he had Esav together with Yaakov. But Yaakov had 12 Shivatim, all tzaddikim, and that was because the Zohama departed from him finally. Shelo haya ben shum dofi, that there was no negative aspect in those children, so it only took 3 generations. That's in distinction, that's contradiction to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says that the reason why, that it was only at Har Sinai that the Jews lost that influence. But according to Rabbi Abba Bar Kana, it was even in the generation of Yaakov. By the time Yaakov came along, he already was free of that influence and was able to produce the 12 Shvatim that didn't have it. So it happened earlier in history than Rabbi Yochanan says. Now it's interesting that you'll notice that just one observation about the Haggadah is that Rabbi Asi was a lot more, his reasons dissed a lot of people, right? They were a little more critical. He was putting people down, the Talmidei Chacham, no, the Babylonians don't have anything good, and the only reason why they like the holidays is because they are poor, and the reason why the Chachamim dress is because they're not really Chachamim, they're not so smart, and the reason why the non-Jews the idolaters are bad or they're disgusting is because they eat disgusting things. So he was much more negative, whereas Rabbi Yochanan was like, no, they are, it's a curse on the people of Israel that they don't enjoy the festivals. So don't look at it, the Babylonians, there's something wrong with them that they're enjoying the festivals, it's only because they're poor. No, we don't enjoy it because we're not as fortunate. And the Talmidei Chachamim are Chachamim in Bavel. They're doing lots of good things there. Don't look at them negatively. And even the idolaters who have the influence of the Nachash, That's the reason. It's a spiritual thing. It's not because of their physical habits. It's a spiritual thing that they could get out of themselves if they came to the Torah and benefited from the Torah. It's not because of their lifestyle, what they eat, but because of their spiritual state that could be remedied. So have a great day, everybody.